When I found those offshore bank statements in my husband's jacket pocket, my hands started shaking. $5.2 million. Our entire company. Gone. Transferred to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Accounts I'd never heard of. With signatures that looked like mine, but weren't quite right. David thought I was folding his laundry like the good little wife I'd always been. He had no idea I'd spent 30 years as a bank compliance officer, catching people who did exactly this. As I stared at those documents, I had a choice. I could confront him, cry, beg him to stop, or I could do something else entirely. You can't imagine what I chose to do. But I can tell you this. David had no idea who he was really married to. Let me start from the beginning. 8 months earlier, I was Margaret Chen, 58 years old, married to David for 28 years. To everyone who knew us, we were the perfect couple. David ran our financial consulting firm while I handled the administrative side. At least that's what he told people. What David told people wasn't quite the truth. I had spent 3 decades as a senior compliance officer at First National Bank, specializing in detecting financial crimes, money laundering, embezzlement, offshore schemes. I'd seen it all. When I retired 2 years ago, David suggested we start our own consulting firm. "You handle the paperwork, honey," he'd say with that charming smile. "I'll handle the clients." It seemed like the perfect arrangement. David was charming, persuasive, excellent with people. I understood the regulatory requirements, the compliance protocols, the legal frameworks that kept financial businesses operating legitimately. Chen Financial Consulting had grown quickly. Within 18 months, we had over 40 clients, most of them elderly individuals seeking retirement planning and investment management services. Our clients trusted us. They trusted David's warm personality and financial expertise. They trusted my background in banking compliance. They trusted that their life savings were in competent, ethical hands. They had no idea that one of us was systematically betraying that trust. But here's what David didn't understand about paperwork. When you've spent 30 years reading financial documents, you notice things, patterns, inconsistencies, numbers that don't quite add up. And David's numbers, they hadn't been adding up for months. It started small. A client payment that seemed unusually large for the services we provided. A business expense I didn't recognize. Transfer fees that appeared excessive. David would wave off my questions with practiced ease. "Don't worry about it, Margaret. You know numbers aren't your strong suit." Numbers weren't my strong suit. That's what my husband of 28 years believed about the woman who had caught over 200 financial criminals during her career. The woman who had testified in federal court 17 times. The woman who had developed fraud detection protocols still used by 3 major banks. The woman who had received commendations from the FBI Financial Crimes Division for her investigative work. But I let him believe it. Because sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. The first real warning sign came 3 months before I found those bank statements. David started working late, every night, coming home after midnight, claiming he was building new client relationships. "Margaret, you know how demanding these elderly clients can be," he'd explain. "They want personal attention, hand-holding. I have to build trust." I understood. Building client relationships was crucial in our business, especially with elderly clients who had been burned by financial advisors before. But something felt off. David had always been a morning person. He did his best thinking, his best client work, before noon. Evening meetings had never been his preference. When I asked about the specific clients requiring these late-night consultations, David became vague. "The Hendersons are night owls," he'd say. Or, "Mrs. Patterson feels more comfortable discussing finances after dinner." I knew our client roster. I handled all the compliance documentation. I'd never heard of clients requesting evening appointments, but I trusted my husband. After 28 years of marriage, You learn to give people the benefit of the doubt. That trust lasted until the Tuesday evening in March, when I decided to surprise him at the office with dinner. I'd spent the afternoon preparing David's favorite meal, beef stew with fresh bread, the same recipe I'd been making since our second year of marriage. I thought it would be a romantic gesture, a reminder of the early days when we were building our life together. I drove to our office building at 7:30 p.m., expecting to find David working late with one of his demanding clients. The office was dark, completely empty. The parking lot was deserted except for my car. The building's night security guard confirmed that no one had been in our office since 5 p.m. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I called his cell phone. "Hey, honey, where are you?" "At the office, working on the Morrison account," he said without hesitation. "This client is really demanding, wants to review every detail of his investment strategy." I was staring at our dark office building when he said those words. I could hear background noise through the phone, music, conversation, the clink of glasses. David wasn't at the office. He was at a restaurant or bar, and he was lying to me, not just forgetting to mention a change of venue, not just being imprecise about his location, deliberately lying. "How much longer do you think you'll be?" I asked, testing him. "Oh, probably another 2 hours. You know how Mr. Morrison gets when he's worried about his portfolio. I might not be home until after 10. Another lie. We didn't have a client named Morrison. I'd processed every compliance form, every account opening document, every client agreement for Chen Financial Consulting. There was no Morrison account. That's when I knew. My husband wasn't just working late. He was lying to me. Systematically. Deliberately. With practiced ease. And if David was lying about where he was spending his evenings, what else was he lying about? I drove home in silence, my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to consider. That night, I did something I'd never done in 28 years of marriage. I started paying attention. Real attention. The kind of attention I'd paid to suspicious financial transactions during my banking career. What I discovered next would change everything I thought I knew about the man I'd married. But more importantly, it would remind me exactly who I was. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 28 years of marriage. I started investigating my own husband. Not emotionally. Not like a heartbroken wife driven by jealousy or suspicion. Like a bank compliance officer who'd just discovered suspicious activity. I'd investigated thousands of financial crimes during my career. I knew the patterns. I understood the methodologies. I recognized the warning signs that most people missed. And now, for the first time, I was applying those skills to someone I loved. The thought terrified me. But my professional instincts were screaming that something was very, very wrong. I began with our business bank statements. As the co-owner and compliance officer for Chen Financial Consulting, I had every legal right to access them. I'd been reviewing these statements monthly for 2 years, but always with trust, always assuming that any irregularities had reasonable explanations. Now I was reviewing them with suspicion. What I found made my professional instincts scream danger. Large cash withdrawals. 50,000 here, 30,000 there. Always in amounts just under the federal reporting requirements that I knew by heart. $10,000 was the threshold. Any cash transaction of $10,000 or more required a currency transaction report to be filed with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. David knew those requirements. He'd asked me about them repeatedly when we started the business. "Just curious," he'd said then. "What amount triggers bank reporting? What kind of transactions raise red flags?" I'd explained the regulations in detail, the reporting thresholds, the suspicious activity indicators, the compliance protocols that banks use to detect money laundering. I'd thought I was educating my business partner. Now I realized I'd been training a criminal. Because David was withdrawing $9,500. Repeatedly, systematically. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate structuring to avoid federal reporting requirements. It was textbook money laundering. But money laundering requires a source and a destination. Where was all this cash coming from? And where was it going? I pulled up our client account records, every deposit, every fee payment, every investment transaction. Our legitimate business income couldn't possibly account for the cash volumes David was moving, which meant he was bringing money into our business from outside sources. Money that our clients didn't know about. Money that wasn't being reported to the IRS. Money that was being washed through our legitimate financial consulting business and then moved offshore. My husband was using our company as a money laundering operation, but I needed to understand the scope. Was this a side business? A one-time favor for a friend? Or something more systematic? I decided to find out. The next evening, David announced another late client meeting. This time, I was ready. I'd spent 30 years conducting surveillance on financial criminals. I knew how to follow someone without being detected. I understood counter-surveillance techniques. I had the patience to wait hours for the right moment to gather evidence. David had no idea he was about to be investigated by someone with 3 decades of experience catching people who did exactly what he was doing. I followed him. David drove to Chez Laurent, an upscale French restaurant downtown. Expensive, discreet. The kind of place where wealthy people conducted private business over wine and foie gras. But he wasn't meeting a client. He was meeting a woman. Tall, blonde, maybe 35 years old. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry, the kind of polished appearance that suggested serious money. She carried herself with confidence, like someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. They hugged like lovers. They sat close together like conspirators. They talked in whispers like people sharing secrets. I took a table 3 sections away, using skills I'd learned during undercover banking investigations, positioning myself to observe without being noticed, reading body language, noting behavioral patterns, taking photographs with my phone's zoom lens. The woman handed David a manila envelope. He opened it discreetly, reviewed the contents, and nodded approvingly. Then he handed her something in return. Even from across the restaurant, I could see what it was. Bank account information, routing numbers, account access codes, information that would allow someone to move money electronically, information that David should never have been sharing with anyone outside our business. My husband wasn't just having an affair. He was conducting criminal business with his mistress, financial business. I watched them for 2 hours. They reviewed documents. They made phone calls on separate phones. They exchanged what appeared to be account passwords and access codes. This wasn't romance. This was a business meeting between criminal partners. When they finally left the restaurant, they didn't leave together. The woman departed first, David 10 minutes later. Counter-surveillance technique. Behavior I'd seen from sophisticated financial criminals. I followed David home, arriving 5 minutes after him. "How was your evening?" I asked casually. "Exhausting," David replied. "Mrs. Patterson is so worried about her investment portfolio. She wanted to review every transaction from the last 6 months. You know how paranoid elderly clients can get." Another lie, smooth, convincing, delivered without hesitation. Mrs. Patterson was a real client, but she lived in an assisted living facility with strict visiting hours. No evening appointments allowed. David was getting better at lying. More sophisticated. More believable. Which suggested he'd been practicing. Over the next 2 weeks, I followed David to 4 more client meetings. Same pattern, different restaurants, same routine, documents exchanged, account information shared, phone calls made to numbers with area codes I didn't recognize. David spoke fluent Spanish. I'd known that since our 2nd year of marriage. He'd learned it for business, he'd explained. More opportunities in international finance. Now I understood what kind of international finance he'd been referring to. The phone calls were to banks in the Cayman Islands. offshore financial institutions that specialized in helping wealthy individuals hide money from tax authorities. David was coordinating systematic money laundering operations with international banking partners. This wasn't a side business or a one-time transaction. This was an ongoing criminal enterprise. On a Thursday night, I watched David hand his mystery partner a key. A key I recognized immediately. It was the key to our office safe. The safe that contained all our client account information, social security numbers, banking details, investment portfolios. Everything a criminal would need to steal identities and drain retirement accounts. David was giving a stranger access to the most sensitive financial information of every elderly client who trusted us with their life savings. That's when I realized this wasn't just money laundering. This was identity theft, elder abuse, systematic financial crime targeting the most vulnerable people in our community. And it was happening under my name. Because our business was registered as Chen Financial Consulting, Margaret Chen, primary owner and compliance officer. David had been very insistent about that structure when we formed the company. For liability purposes, he'd explained, banks trust compliance officers. Regulators respect your background. It'll help us get better rates and more favorable terms. Now I understood the real reason. If anyone got caught, if any of this criminal activity was discovered, if federal investigators came looking for answers, they would come for me first. Margaret Chen, primary owner, the compliance officer who should have detected the suspicious activity, the banking professional who should have reported the money laundering. David had built his criminal empire using my reputation, my expertise, and my legal liability. When it all came crashing down, I would be the one facing federal charges. But David had made one critical mistake. He'd chosen to commit financial crimes against a woman who'd spent her entire career catching financial criminals. He'd used my reputation to build his criminal network. Now I was going to use my expertise to destroy it. What I did next? He never saw coming. Have you ever caught someone you trusted in a financial lie? That gut feeling when the numbers don't add up? Share below if you've experienced this. Your instincts might be protecting you from something bigger. I needed proof, not suspicions, not photographs of restaurant meetings, legal evidence that would hold up in federal court. So I did what any good compliance officer would do when building a case against financial criminals. I started gathering documentation, systematically, methodically, following the same protocols I'd used to catch money launderers at the bank. First, I needed to test David's lies, create a controlled situation where he'd be forced to choose between honesty and deception, where his response would reveal the true scope of what he was hiding. That opportunity came sooner than expected. My sister Linda lived in Denver. We talked every few weeks, but we weren't particularly close. She had her life, I had mine. David barely knew her, which made her perfect for what I needed to do. I called Linda on a Friday morning and explained the situation. Not everything. I wasn't ready to admit that my husband was a criminal. But enough. Linda, I need your help with something. I think David might be having financial problems with our business. I need to test whether he's being honest with me about our cash flow. What do you need me to do? Call me tomorrow morning. Say you have a medical emergency. That you need $50,000 for surgery that insurance won't cover? Ask if we can help. Linda was confused, but she agreed. Sisters help each other, even with strange requests. Saturday morning at 9 a.m., my phone rang. Margaret, Linda said, following the script we'd discussed. I need help. I was just diagnosed with a brain aneurysm. The surgeon says I need emergency surgery, but my insurance won't cover the procedure. It's experimental. $50,000. I don't have that kind of money. Can you and David help me? Linda was a good actress. Her voice trembled with exactly the right amount of fear and desperation. Oh my God, Linda, I said, loud enough for David to hear from the kitchen. Of course we'll help. Let me talk to David right now. I hung up and immediately called David to the living room. Honey, we have a family emergency. Linda has a brain aneurysm. She needs $50,000 for emergency surgery. Insurance won't cover it. Can we take it from the business account? David's reaction was immediate and telling. His face went pale. His hands started shaking slightly. The confident demeanor he'd maintained for months cracked for just an instant. But then he recovered, smiled sympathetically, put his arm around my shoulders. Oh, Margaret, I wish we could help, I really do. But we're in a really tight cash position right now. Everything's tied up in client investments. We just don't have that kind of liquidity available. I was staring at our business bank statement when he said those words. Current balance, $237,412. More than enough to save my sister's life, if she had actually needed saving. Are you sure? I pressed. This is my sister we're talking about. Her life is at stake. David's performance was masterful. He pulled up our online banking on his laptop, showed me the account balances, explained how our money was temporarily committed to client investment opportunities. Look, honey, I know this is heartbreaking, but we have fiduciary responsibilities to our clients. We can't just withdraw their money for personal emergencies, even family emergencies. Lies, smooth, convincing lies backed up by fraudulent documentation. What if we took out a business loan? I suggested. Margaret, you know banks won't lend to financial consulting firms without extensive collateral. It would take weeks to process, and Linda needs surgery now. More lies. We had excellent credit. We could have secured a $50,000 business line of credit with a single phone call. I'm sorry, honey, David concluded. If we had it, you know I'd give it to Linda in a heartbeat. But we're running lean this quarter. He was lying, smoothly, convincingly, without a trace of guilt. My husband of 28 years was willing to let my sister die rather than admit he'd been stealing our money. That's when I knew this wasn't just financial crime. This was something much darker. David wasn't just stealing money. He was willing to let family members suffer catastrophic consequences to protect his criminal operation. The man I'd married had become a sociopath. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront David. I wasn't going to beg him to stop. I wasn't going to give him the chance to explain or manipulate me further. I was going to do what I'd done for 30 years when I discovered financial crimes. Build an airtight case, gather irrefutable evidence, and hand it over to the appropriate authorities. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of David's criminal operation. I started with our office computer system. David thought I didn't understand technology. Another useful underestimation. I'd been running forensic software analysis on bank computers since the early 2000s. Digital evidence recovery was part of my compliance training. I knew how to access deleted files, trace email communications, and recover browser histories. David's computer was child's play compared to the sophisticated systems I'd investigated at the bank. What I found exceeded my worst fears. In a hidden folder labeled Client Development, I discovered David's real business. Detailed profiles on over 80 elderly individuals across our region. Not just our legitimate clients, targets. Each profile contained everything a financial predator would need. Names, addresses, family contacts, medical conditions, financial assets, social vulnerabilities, psychological weaknesses. Mrs. Rodriguez, age 79, recently widowed, suffering from early-stage diabetes. Assets, $340,000 in savings, $180,000 in her late husband's 401k. Vulnerability, lonely, isolated from adult children who live out of state. Strategy, romantic companionship leading to investment advice. Mr. Kim, age 73, retired engineer, mild cognitive decline. Assets, $1, $2 million in retirement accounts, fully paid home worth $400,000. Vulnerability, confusion about modern financial products, pride preventing him from asking family for help. Strategy, complex investment products with hidden fees and early withdrawal penalties. Mrs. Patterson, age 68, former schoolteacher, arthritis limiting her mobility. Assets: $220,000 in teacher's pension, $150,000 in savings. Vulnerability: fear of becoming a burden on her daughter, desire to leave inheritance. Strategy: high-risk investments promising unrealistic returns. These weren't random victims. They were carefully selected targets chosen for maximum financial exploitation potential. David had been building this database for over a year, researching victims, planning approaches, developing customized strategies for each elderly person he intended to victimize. Our legitimate financial consulting business was just a front for systematic elder abuse. But the most chilling discovery was in a folder labeled Cayman Trust. Bank statements from 3 different offshore accounts. Account balances totaling over $8 million. Money that didn't belong to David. Money stolen from the elderly clients who had trusted us with their life savings. Mr. Patterson's entire retirement portfolio, $1. $4 million transferred to high-yield international investments that didn't exist. Mrs. Kim's inheritance from her late husband, $890,000, moved to tax-advantaged offshore accounts that she couldn't access. Mrs. Rodriguez's life insurance settlement, $600,000, invested in exclusive opportunities available only to preferred clients. David wasn't just stealing from our business. He was systematically draining the retirement accounts of vulnerable elderly people who trusted him with their financial security. People who had worked 40 or 50 years to save enough money for a comfortable retirement. People who believed David was protecting their assets and growing their wealth. People who had no idea that their trusted financial advisor was stealing everything they had. The scope was staggering. The planning was sophisticated. The execution was nearly flawless. But David had miscalculated one crucial factor. He'd built his criminal operation under the identity of a woman who'd spent her career destroying criminal operations. He'd used my reputation to gain client trust. He'd used my expertise to navigate regulatory requirements. He'd used my compliance background to avoid detection by banking authorities. But he'd never considered that I might use that same expertise against him. If this story is making you think of someone in your life, a parent, grandparent, or friend who might be vulnerable to financial manipulation, please share this with them. Knowledge is protection. What happened next would be the most satisfying investigation of my professional life. Because David was about to discover what happens when you steal from someone who spent 30 years catching thieves. The deeper I dug into David's computer files, the more horrifying the truth became. This wasn't just financial theft. This was systematic elderly abuse with a deeply personal twist that made my blood run cold. In a folder labeled Exit Strategy, I found documents that revealed the true scope of David's plan. He wasn't just stealing money from elderly clients. He was planning to destroy me completely. Divorce papers, already drafted by a law firm I'd never heard of. The grounds? My alleged mental instability and financial irresponsibility. The documents painted a picture of a woman suffering from early-stage dementia. Someone who had become paranoid about money. Someone who was making irrational financial decisions that threatened the business and endangered client assets. Someone who could no longer be trusted with financial responsibilities. Medical evaluations, forged. Documenting my supposed cognitive decline over the past 6 months. Signed by Dr. Harrison Mitchell, a neurologist I'd never met. According to these fabricated reports, I'd been showing signs of memory loss, confusion about financial procedures, and paranoid delusions about business transactions. The medical timeline was sophisticated. It documented a gradual mental deterioration that would justify David's emergency petition for power of attorney. Power of attorney forms, already prepared, with David's signature and my signature. Signatures I'd never written. David had been practicing my handwriting. The forgeries were nearly perfect. close enough to fool a casual examination, sophisticated enough to hold up in probate court. According to these documents, I had voluntarily transferred all financial decision-making authority to David due to my declining mental capacity. The business, our house, our bank accounts, our investment portfolios, everything would be under David's sole control. He wasn't just planning to steal our money and disappear. He was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, steal everything, and leave me holding the legal responsibility for his crimes. The timeline was chilling in its precision. Phase 1. Systematic asset transfer to offshore accounts, already in progress for 8 months. Phase 2. Fabricate evidence of my mental decline, medical documents prepared, ready for filing. Phase 3. File for emergency divorce and power of attorney, scheduled for next month. Phase 4. Final asset liquidation and international departure, planned for July, just 6 weeks away. David had given himself 10 months to completely destroy my life. But there was more. The woman I'd seen him with wasn't just his mistress. She was Jessica Torres, and according to the detailed communications I found on David's computer, she'd helped him do this before. To his first wife in Phoenix, to his business partner in San Diego, to an elderly client in Portland who'd trusted him with her retirement portfolio. David had a pattern, a methodology, a system. Find a woman with financial expertise or significant assets, marry her or gain her professional trust, systematically steal everything while building evidence of her mental incapacity, then destroy her credibility and disappear with the money. I was victim number 4 in a pattern that went back at least 8 years. The email communications between David and Jessica were like reading a criminal instruction manual. Margaret is starting to ask questions about the transfers, David had written 3 weeks ago. We need to accelerate the timeline. Stick to the plan, Jessica replied. The medical documentation needs to show gradual decline over at least 6 months. Too fast, and the court will be suspicious. What if she figures it out before we're ready? Then we move to the contingency plan. The insurance policies are already in place. Insurance policies. My hand shook as I searched for the insurance folder. Life insurance policies on me. 3 different companies, totaling $2 million. All purchased within the last year. All listing David as the sole beneficiary. All with suicide exclusion periods that had recently expired. And in a subfolder labeled Contingency Plan, detailed research. Methods for making murder look like suicide. Medications that would be undetectable in standard autopsies. Timing strategies that would coincide with financial discovery and emotional breakdown. David had researched how to kill me and make it look like I'd taken my own life. If the dementia angle didn't work, if the divorce proceedings got complicated, if I somehow discovered his scheme before he could complete the power of attorney transfer, he had a backup plan. My death. The research was thorough and terrifying. He'd studied suicide patterns among elderly women facing financial ruin. He'd researched medications that could cause heart failure in people with no history of cardiac problems. He'd even drafted a suicide note in my handwriting. I can't live with the shame of what I've done to our clients. David, I'm sorry for destroying our life together. Please forgive me. The note was convincing. It referenced specific client accounts that had been mismanaged. It expressed guilt about financial decisions that had endangered retirement savings. It painted me as a compliance officer who had failed in her most basic responsibility. David had planned to make my murder look like the suicide of a disgraced financial professional who couldn't face the consequences of her actions. But the most chilling discovery was the timeline. According to his email communications with Jessica, David was planning to implement the contingency plan within the next 2 weeks. He'd grown impatient with the gradual approach. He wanted immediate access to all our assets. He wanted to disappear with Jessica before I could discover what he'd been doing. And if I got in the way, he was prepared to kill me. I sat in our home office, surrounded by evidence of my husband's plan to destroy me, and felt something I'd never experienced in 30 years of investigating financial crimes. Terror. Not just fear. Terror. The man I'd loved for 28 years. The man I'd trusted with my life, my business, my future. He was planning to murder me. But as the terror faded, it was replaced by something much more dangerous. Professional determination. David had planned everything except one crucial detail. He'd chosen as his victim a woman who'd spent 30 years staying 3 steps ahead of financial criminals. A woman who understood criminal psychology. A woman who knew how to build cases that destroyed criminals completely. A woman who had never lost an investigation. And I'd been gathering evidence on him for 4 months. Evidence he didn't know existed. Evidence that would destroy him completely. Evidence that would send him to federal prison for the rest of his life. What's the hardest lesson you've learned about trusting people with your financial security? Share your wisdom below. Your experience could save someone's life. David thought he was weeks away from the perfect crime. He had no idea that his victim had already built the perfect case against him. The phone call I made that night would change everything. But David had no idea what was coming. Because the woman he'd planned to murder was about to become his worst nightmare. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. Agent Sarah Kim, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Sarah, it's Margaret Chen. Silence. Then, Margaret, how's retirement treating you? Please tell me you're calling to say you're bored and want to come back. I need to meet with you, tonight. And Sarah, bring your recording equipment and your partner. This is big. The tone in my voice must have conveyed the urgency, because Sarah's demeanor shifted immediately. What do you have, Margaret? Systematic elderly financial abuse, international money laundering, identity theft, forged documents, murder conspiracy, $8.4 million in stolen assets, over 80 documented victims. A long pause. Then, Margaret, who are we talking about? My husband. Agent Sarah Kim and I had worked together for 8 years during my final tenure at the bank. Together, we'd built cases against some of the most sophisticated financial criminals in the Pacific Northwest. She knew my reputation. She trusted my judgment. She understood that when Margaret Chen called about financial crimes, someone was going to federal prison. More importantly, she knew I didn't make accusations lightly. Where do you want to meet? She asked. Somewhere private. I have 4 months of evidence to show you. And Sarah, we're running out of time. He's planning to kill me within the next 2 weeks. We met at a 24-hour diner outside the city. Sarah brought Agent Rodriguez and enough recording equipment to document everything. I brought 4 months of evidence, bank records, computer files, photographs from restaurant surveillance, audio recordings from hidden devices I'd placed in David's car, email communications between David and Jessica, medical records proving the forgeries, insurance documents showing the murder planning. Jesus Christ, Margaret, Sarah whispered as she reviewed the files. This is the most comprehensive financial crimes case you've ever seen, I finished, because I built it. What I'd assembled wasn't just evidence, it was a complete criminal case file, ready for federal prosecution. While David thought I was being a good little wife, I'd been operating like the senior compliance officer I'd always been. Every suspicious transaction traced and documented with banking records, every secret meeting photographed and geolocated with time-stamped evidence, every phone call monitored and recorded through devices David didn't know existed, every computer file copied and preserved using forensic software David had never heard of, every conversation analyzed for criminal intent and conspiracy patterns. David's criminal operation was sophisticated. My investigation was more sophisticated. How long have you known? Agent Rodriguez asked. 4 months for certain. But looking back through the evidence timeline, I think David's been planning this since the day we got married. I showed them the pattern analysis I'd constructed, David's insistence on putting the business in my name, his detailed questions about my banking expertise and regulatory knowledge. His interest in my compliance procedures and fraud detection methods. His cultivation of elderly clients through my professional reputation. Even our marriage had been part of a long-term criminal strategy. He needed a bank compliance officer's expertise and professional credibility, I explained. What better way to get unlimited access than to marry one? Sarah nodded grimly. And when he was finished using you, the life insurance policies and murder research tell that story. Agent Rodriguez was reviewing the victim database. Margaret, this goes beyond your husband's operation. These targeting profiles, they're too sophisticated for a two-person team. He was right. The psychological analysis, the financial research, the coordinated approach across multiple states. David and Jessica weren't working alone. We think your husband is part of a larger criminal network, Sarah explained. We've been tracking similar elderly abuse patterns across the western states. The methodology is identical. The targeting criteria match perfectly. Are you saying David is connected to other operations? We're saying David's operation might be a regional franchise of something much bigger. The implications were staggering. David wasn't just stealing from elderly clients in our area. He was part of a systematic criminal enterprise that was targeting vulnerable seniors across multiple states. But that also meant I had stumbled onto something much more valuable than a single case. I had evidence that could help the FBI dismantle an entire criminal network. What do you need from me? I asked. Everything you've already given us, plus one more thing, Sarah said. We need you to help us catch David in the act. What do you mean? David's planning to liquidate the remaining accounts next week, right? Before he files the divorce papers and disappears? According to his email communications with Jessica, yes. He's planning the final transfers this Thursday. How do you know the specific timing? I smiled. Because I've been monitoring his communications for months, and because yesterday, I helped him plan it. The agent stared at me. David's been getting nervous about the timeline. He thinks I'm starting to suspect something, so yesterday, I gave him exactly what he needed to feel confident about accelerating his plan. Which was? I told David I was planning to hire a forensic accountant to review our business finances. Sarah's eyes widened. You did what? I said I was concerned about some irregularities in our client statements, that I wanted to bring in an outside expert to make sure we were in full compliance with all regulations. How did David react? Exactly like I knew he would. He panicked, called Jessica immediately. They moved their final liquidation timeline up to this Thursday. This Thursday? 3 days from now? Yes, and they're planning to make the final transfers Thursday morning at exactly 10 a.m. How can you be so specific about the timing? Because I created the window for them. The room went silent. I told David I had a dentist appointment Thursday morning, a complex procedure that would take 3 hours. Said I'd be completely unreachable from 9:30 until 12:30. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. You gave him the perfect opportunity. I gave him enough rope to hang himself, and Jessica, and whoever else is involved in this network. But you'll actually be sitting in the FBI field office, watching David commit wire fraud in real time while federal agents monitor every transaction. Sarah grinned. Margaret, you're brilliant. No, I said, I'm thorough. And I'm angry. But there was more to the plan than just catching David stealing money. Sarah, I need you to understand something. David isn't just planning to steal the remaining client funds and disappear. He's planning to frame me for the entire operation. I showed them the forged documents, the fabricated medical reports, the false power of attorney forms. When David disappears, he's going to leave behind evidence that makes me look like the criminal mastermind. The compliance officer who went rogue, the trusted professional who betrayed elderly clients. That's why the timing is so crucial, Agent Rodriguez realized. He needs to be caught in the act, with the evidence showing he's the one making the transfers. Exactly. If we wait too long, David completes the frame job and disappears. If we move too early, we don't have enough evidence to prove the full scope of the conspiracy. But if we catch him Thursday morning, we get him stealing the money in real time. We get Jessica as an accomplice. We get the client funds before they disappear offshore. And we get evidence that exonerates me and implicates the entire criminal network. Sarah was taking notes frantically. Margaret, what you've built here isn't just a case against your husband. It's a blueprint for dismantling a multi-state criminal enterprise. I know, I said simply. I've been doing this for 30 years. What I hadn't told them yet was the most satisfying part of my plan. The part that would destroy David completely. There's one more thing, I said. David has no idea that I know about the murder plan. What do you mean? He thinks his contingency strategy is still secret. He believes that if the financial fraud gets discovered, he can still eliminate me and disappear with the insurance money. Jesus, Margaret, are you safe? I'm safer than David realizes, because while he's been planning to kill me, I've been planning to destroy him. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, the one that would guarantee David spent the rest of his life in federal prison. Audio recordings of David and Jessica discussing my murder. Conversations I'd recorded using devices they didn't know existed. Detailed planning sessions about timing, methods, and cover stories. Evidence that would add conspiracy to commit murder to David's already extensive list of federal charges. Thursday morning isn't just about catching David stealing money, I explained. It's about catching him in the middle of a conspiracy that includes fraud, elder abuse, money laundering, and planned murder. How many federal charges are we looking at? Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, identity theft, elder abuse, conspiracy, RICO violations, and conspiracy to commit murder. Sarah whistled. That's life in federal prison. That's exactly what David deserves. Agent Rodriguez was reviewing the murder evidence. Margaret, how did you record these conversations without David knowing? The same way I've been gathering evidence for 4 months, by being smarter than he is. Thursday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. I sat in the FBI surveillance room, watching live video feeds from our office. Multiple agents monitoring computer systems, banking partners standing by to freeze offshore accounts, local police coordinating perimeter security. 28 years of marriage was about to end with federal handcuffs. At 9:55 a.m., David arrived at the office. He looked nervous but determined. He had no idea that every keystroke, every phone call, every movement was being recorded by federal agents. He had no idea that his naive little wife was sitting in an FBI field office, watching him destroy his own life. Target entering the building, Agent Rodriguez spoke into his radio. I watched David on the security camera as he unlocked our office door. The same door I'd walked through 1,000 times as his loving, trusting wife. Today, I was watching as the senior consultant to the FBI Financial Crimes Division. Margaret, Sarah said quietly, are you ready for this? I've been ready for 4 months. At exactly 10 a.m., David began the wire transfer process. It was time to destroy my husband. I watched David access our business account through the surveillance feed. Current balance, $1.8 million, the last of our legitimate client funds, money that elderly people had trusted us to protect and grow for their retirement security. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Account numbers for 3 different Cayman Islands banks. Routing information for international transfers. Authentication codes that would move the money beyond the reach of U.S. authorities within minutes. First transfer initiated, the tech agent announced. Target account, $600,000. But David wasn't just stealing our remaining business assets. He was systematically draining every client account he had access to. Second transfer initiated. Client emergency fund, $400,000. Third transfer, pension rollover account, $550,000. Fourth transfer, widow's life insurance settlement, $300,000. David was stealing the life savings of people who had trusted him with their most precious asset, their financial security for old age. Money that represented 40 or 50 years of work, sacrifices made to build retirement nest eggs, life insurance settlements from deceased spouses, emergency funds set aside for medical crises. But the FBI was tracking every transaction in real time. International banking partners were monitoring the receiving accounts. Financial intelligence units were documenting the complete money trail from source to destination. David thought he was executing the perfect crime. He was actually creating the perfect evidence trail for his own prosecution. At 10:07, Agent Kim spoke into her radio. All units, Target has completed 4 unauthorized wire transfers totaling $1.85 million. Federal wire fraud in progress. Move in now. I watched through the camera feed as FBI agents entered our office. The look of absolute shock on David's face when he saw them was indescribable. Shock, panic, disbelief, terror. But also something else I hadn't expected. Recognition. He knew exactly what was happening. And he knew exactly who was responsible. David Chen, Agent Rodriguez announced, "You're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, identity theft, and elder abuse." David's head snapped toward the camera he'd never noticed. The camera I'd had installed 3 months ago. He looked directly into the lens with an expression of pure hatred. He knew I was watching. He knew I had orchestrated this. He knew that his naive little wife had just destroyed him completely. But the arrests weren't finished. At the same moment David was being handcuffed in our office, federal agents in 3 different cities were executing coordinated arrests. Jessica Torres in Seattle, Robert Martinez in Portland, Linda Kim in San Francisco. The entire criminal network that had been targeting elderly Americans across the western states. David's operation wasn't just a local scheme. It was part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that the FBI had been tracking for over a year. My evidence hadn't just helped them solve David's case. It had given them everything they needed to dismantle the entire network. Within 6 hours, federal agents had arrested 12 accomplices across 4 states. They'd frozen $14 million in stolen assets across 23 offshore accounts. They'd identified over 200 victims of systematic elderly financial abuse. And they'd prevented at least 6 planned murders, including mine. But the most satisfying moment came when Agent Kim called me 2 hours after David's arrest. "Margaret, we found something in David's car." "What?" "A syringe. And a vial of potassium chloride." My blood ran cold. Potassium chloride was a heart medication that, in large doses, would cause immediate cardiac arrest. Undetectable in most standard autopsies. "David was carrying murder weapons," Agent Kim continued. "We think he was planning to kill you tonight." I sat down heavily. While I'd been watching David get arrested for financial crimes, he'd been carrying the tools to murder me. If I hadn't built this case, if I hadn't contacted the FBI, if I hadn't orchestrated his arrest, I would have been dead within hours. "There's more, Margaret. We found detailed plans in his briefcase, maps of your daily routine, photos of your car, research on how to stage a cardiac arrest to look natural." David hadn't just been planning to kill me eventually. He'd been planning to kill me immediately after stealing the final assets. The trial began 6 months later. Federal prosecutors charged David with 47 separate crimes across multiple jurisdictions: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, identity theft, elder abuse, conspiracy, RICO violations, and conspiracy to commit murder. I testified for 4 days as the prosecution's primary witness. Federal prosecutor Jennifer Walsh had been prosecuting financial crimes for 15 years. She'd never seen a case so thoroughly documented. "Mrs. Chen," she said during my testimony, "in your professional opinion as a former senior compliance officer, how would you characterize the defendant's criminal operation?" "Systematic, sophisticated, and completely preventable if he hadn't made one critical error. Which was, he chose to commit financial crimes against someone who'd spent 30 years detecting financial crimes. David's defense attorney, Marcus Webb, tried to paint me as a vengeful wife, fabricating evidence out of spite. He failed spectacularly, because every piece of evidence was professionally gathered, legally obtained, and forensically verified according to federal standards. David's computer files, analyzed by FBI digital forensics experts, his financial records, authenticated by banking institutions, his communications with accomplices, verified through telecommunications records, his murder plans, corroborated by physical evidence and witness testimony. All documented according to the same standards I'd used to build financial crimes cases for 30 years. Marcus Webb had nothing to work with except desperation and misdirection. Mrs. Chen, isn't it true that you were angry about your husband's affair with Jessica Torres? No. You weren't upset about his relationship with Ms. Torres? I was concerned about his criminal conspiracy with Ms. Torres. But you believed there was a romantic relationship? I observed systematic criminal coordination between co-conspirators. So, you admit you were investigating your husband out of personal suspicion? I was investigating systematic financial crimes occurring under my business license. That's what compliance officers do. We investigate financial crimes. And you built this case because you felt betrayed? I built this case because elderly citizens were being systematically victimized by criminals using my professional reputation to gain their trust. The defense crumbled because I wasn't an angry wife seeking revenge. I was a financial crimes expert who had discovered crimes and reported them to the appropriate authorities. David faced 47 federal charges. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 37 minutes. Guilty on all 47 counts. Judge Patricia Harrison had been on the federal bench for 26 years. She'd sentenced hundreds of financial criminals. She'd never seen a case like David's. Mr. Chen, Judge Harrison said during sentencing, in my decades on this bench, I have never encountered such calculated cruelty combined with such systematic betrayal of trust. You didn't just steal money. You systematically targeted the most vulnerable members of our society. You stole their life savings. You destroyed their trust in financial institutions. You planned to murder the woman whose expertise and reputation you exploited to commit these crimes. You treated elderly citizens not as human beings deserving respect and protection, but as targets to be exploited and discarded. You planned to murder your wife not out of passion or desperation, but as a calculated business decision to maximize your criminal profits. David received 38 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Jessica Torres received 22 years for her role in the conspiracy. The other network members received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years, but the legal victory was only the beginning of the justice cascade. The victims of David's network filed a massive class action civil lawsuit seeking damages for financial losses, emotional trauma, and systematic elder abuse. The civil judgment was for $112 million. David would spend the rest of his life in prison, and every asset he ever acquired would go to the people he had victimized. But the most meaningful victory came 3 months after sentencing. I received a call from Mrs. Patterson, one of David's elderly victims. Margaret, I wanted to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Patterson. I should have caught this sooner. No, dear, you saved my life savings. But more than that, you saved my faith in people. Mrs. Patterson had lost $40,000 to David's scheme before the arrests, money she couldn't afford to lose from her teacher's pension. When I found out what David had done, I thought I was stupid, old and stupid and naive. I was ready to never trust anyone again. But then I learned about what you did, how you caught him, how you saved all those other families. You showed me that smart people get fooled by criminals. That being victimized doesn't make you stupid. That good people fight back and protect each other. The civil judgment meant that Mrs. Patterson got her money back, but more importantly, she got her confidence back. "I'm volunteering now," she told me, at the senior center, teaching other elderly folks how to recognize financial scams, sharing your story, helping people understand that they're not alone. Mrs. Patterson wasn't the only victim who found strength through the case. Dozens of elderly clients became advocates for financial protection education. They spoke at community centers, senior living facilities, and banking seminars. They shared their stories to help other families recognize and prevent elder financial abuse. David had tried to destroy vulnerable people for his own profit. Instead, he'd created a community of empowered advocates fighting to protect other seniors. But the most satisfying moment came 6 weeks after sentencing. I received an official letter from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Dear Mrs. Chen," the letter read, "on behalf of the FBI Financial Crimes Division, I want to personally thank you for your exceptional work on Operation Golden Years. Your investigation led to the arrests of 12 criminals, the recovery of $14 million in stolen assets, and the protection of over 200 elderly victims. More importantly, your work dismantled a criminal network that was targeting vulnerable seniors across multiple states. We would be honored to have you join our team as a senior consultant for elder financial protection." I accepted immediately. At 58 years old, I wasn't retiring. I was starting the most important work of my career. Share this with anyone who's ever been told they're too old or too naive to understand finances. Your expertise doesn't expire with age. It accumulates. The business that David had used to commit crimes became my platform for preventing them. Chen Financial Security Consulting. Protecting families from financial predators. Using 30 years of expertise to catch criminals before they strike. David had spent 2 years building a criminal empire under my name. I would spend the rest of my career destroying criminal empires in my own name. 3 years later, Chen Financial Security Consulting had become the premier financial crime prevention firm in the Pacific Northwest. We specialized in protecting elderly clients from exactly the kind of systematic abuse David had orchestrated, but our mission had grown far beyond individual protection. We were changing how society thinks about aging and financial expertise. Our team included 12 employees across 4 states, former FBI agents, retired banking compliance officers, social workers specializing in elder protection, and, most importantly, elderly clients who had survived financial abuse and wanted to help others. Mrs. Patterson had become our most effective educator. "When I walk into a senior center," she told me during our monthly staff meeting, "people see a 70-year-old retired teacher, not a financial expert. They let their guard down. They tell me things they wouldn't tell a banker or an FBI agent." Mrs. Patterson's approach was revolutionary. Instead of lecturing about financial safety, she shared her story, her vulnerability, her recovery. "I tell them about David, about how smart and charming he was, about how he made me feel special and important, about how I never saw it coming. Then I tell them about you, Margaret, about how you caught him, about how your 30 years of expertise saved not just your own life, but the lives of hundreds of other people. I tell them that being victimized doesn't make you stupid, it makes you human, and that fighting back makes you strong." Mrs. Patterson had trained over 2,000 senior citizens to recognize financial abuse patterns. Her workshops were booked months in advance across 3 states. But the most meaningful measure of our success was personal transformation. Take Harold Kim, a 74-year-old retired engineer who'd lost $60,000 to a romance scam before finding our program. "I thought my life was over," Harold told me. "I'd given away my emergency fund to a woman who didn't exist. I felt stupid, ashamed, like I'd lost my mind along with my money." Harold joined our support group reluctantly. He barely spoke during the first 3 meetings, but slowly, he began to understand that his engineering expertise hadn't disappeared when he turned 70. His decades of problem-solving experience hadn't evaporated because he'd been lonely after his wife died. Margaret showed me that criminals target smart people, Harold explained. They don't want victims who are obviously vulnerable. They want people with money, with skills, with something worth stealing. Being targeted means you have something valuable. Fighting back means you're protecting not just yourself, but everyone else they might target next. Harold became one of our most effective advocates. He spoke at technology conferences about digital security for seniors. He taught other widowed men how to recognize romance scams. I spent 40 years solving engineering problems, Harold said during one presentation. Now I'm solving criminal problems. Same skill set, same systematic approach, same determination to find solutions. Harold's transformation represented everything our program was designed to achieve. Not just protection from financial predators, empowerment through expertise recognition, but our impact extended far beyond individual clients. The Chen financial security model had been adopted by banks, senior living communities, and law enforcement agencies across 12 states. We'd trained over 5,000 adult children to recognize when their elderly parents were being financially exploited. We'd helped police departments develop protocols for investigating elder financial abuse. We'd created educational materials used by the AARP, senior centers, and community organizations nationwide. Most importantly, we'd changed the conversation about aging and vulnerability. Instead of viewing elderly citizens as inevitable victims, we taught families to recognize them as experienced experts who deserved respect and protection. Age doesn't eliminate expertise, became our motto. It accumulates it. The FBI had adopted this approach in their elder protection programs. Margaret's model revolutionized how we think about financial crimes against seniors. Agent Sarah Kim told a congressional committee during testimony about elder abuse prevention. Traditional approaches focused on protecting vulnerable elderly people from criminals. Margaret's approach focuses on empowering elderly experts to protect themselves and their communities. The difference is profound. Vulnerable people need rescue. Experts need resources and respect. 6 months later, Congress passed the Elder Financial Expertise Recognition Act, legislation that required financial institutions to develop protocols for honoring elderly clients' financial knowledge while protecting them from exploitation. The law created a new category: senior financial experts, elderly clients with demonstrated financial experience who received enhanced protection and consultation rights. Banks were required to provide additional verification procedures when senior financial experts reported suspicious activity. Financial advisors faced enhanced penalties for exploiting clients with recognized expertise. But the most meaningful moment of my professional transformation came when Maya, my daughter, joined Chen Financial Security as a full partner. "Mom, I want to understand how you did it," she said during our first day working together. "How you went from victim to victor. How you turned the worst betrayal of your life into a mission that's protecting thousands of people." The hardest part, I told her, wasn't catching David. It was trusting myself when someone I loved was telling me I was wrong. "How did you know to trust your instincts over his words?" 30 years of professional experience doesn't disappear because someone you love dismisses it. Your expertise matters more than their opinion. Maya had watched me transform from trusting wife to FBI consultant to business owner to congressional testimony expert. She wanted to continue that mission. "I want to learn how to help families communicate about financial protection without creating conflict," Maya said. "How to teach adult children to respect their parents' expertise while staying alert for exploitation." Maya specialized in family financial communication. She developed workshops for adult children, teaching them how to support elderly parents without undermining their financial autonomy. "The biggest mistake adult children make," Maya explained during one of her presentations, "is assuming that age equals incompetence. They see gray hair and immediately start making decisions for people who have decades more financial experience than they do." My mother caught a sophisticated financial criminal using expertise she'd developed over 30 years. But if my father had succeeded in having her declared mentally incompetent, that expertise would have been legally irrelevant. Adult children need to learn the difference between protection and control, between support and dismissal, between genuine concerns and ageist assumptions. Maya's work helped hundreds of families navigate the complex dynamics of aging, independence, and financial protection. But the most satisfying validation of our mission came from an unexpected source: a letter from David. 3 years into his 38-year federal prison sentence, David wrote to me from his maximum security facility. "Margaret," the letter read, "I've had a lot of time to think about what I did. To you, to our clients, to the families I destroyed. I know you'll never forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that what you built after catching me, it matters. Prisoners talk. Word gets around about cases, about sentences, about the people who put us here. Your story is famous here. The wife who caught her husband, the compliance officer who never gave up, the woman who turned betrayal into protection for thousands of people. You've inspired other victims to fight back, other spouses to trust their instincts, other professionals to use their expertise for protection instead of profit. I destroyed lives for money. You've saved lives for principle. That's the difference between us. I hope someday you can see past what I did to you and feel proud of what you did because of me." I never responded to David's letter, but I kept it. Not as forgiveness, but as reminder. A reminder of how far I'd traveled from that terrified woman who found offshore bank statements in her husband's jacket pocket. A reminder that betrayal doesn't have to define you. Response does. A reminder that expertise earned over decades doesn't disappear because someone you love dismisses it. 5 years after David's arrest, I stood before a Senate committee considering national elder protection legislation. "Senator Williams," I was asked, "what would you say to someone who suspects they're being financially exploited by someone they trust?" "I would tell them 3 things," I replied. "First, trust your expertise. If you've managed money for decades, if you've built financial security through years of careful decisions, if you've successfully navigated complex financial situations before, that expertise doesn't disappear because someone calls you confused. Second, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. If numbers don't add up, demand explanations. If someone isolates you from information or support, recognize that as a warning sign, not protection. Third, trust that you're worth protecting. Criminals target people with something valuable: money, skills, reputation, trust. Being targeted means you have assets worth stealing. Fighting back means you're protecting not just yourself, but everyone else they might victimize. Senator Johnson, another committee member, asked, "What's the most important lesson from your experience?" That age accumulates expertise. It doesn't eliminate it. That 20 or 30 or 40 years of financial experience creates wisdom that deserves respect, not dismissal. When someone tells you that you're too old to understand modern finance, ask yourself, who benefits from your silence? Who profits from your self-doubt? Financial predators count on elderly victims to dismiss their own expertise, to accept that age equals incompetence, to defer to younger people who may have credentials but lack experience. The hardest lesson I learned about people? Sometimes the person you trust most is the one planning to destroy you. But here's what I learned about myself. Your inner wisdom matters. Your professional experience matters. Your instincts matter. Trust them. What's the hardest lesson you had to learn about people? Share your wisdom below. Your experience might save someone else from the pain I went through. And if this story resonates with you, please share it with someone who needs to know that their inner wisdom matters. The committee unanimously recommended the Elder Financial Expertise Protection Act, which became federal law 6 months later. But the real victory wasn't legislative, it was personal. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms. Financial security through expertise, not dependency. Professional respect through competence, not position. Personal relationships based on truth, not manipulation. Family connections strengthened by mutual respect, not control. David had tried to steal my money, my reputation, my sanity, and my life. Instead, he'd given me proof that I was stronger, smarter, and more capable than anyone had imagined, including myself. When someone tells you that you're being paranoid about financial irregularities, ask yourself, who benefits from your silence? When someone dismisses your professional concerns as confusion, remember, age doesn't eliminate expertise. It accumulates it. When someone isolates you from sources of information and support, recognize, that's the strategy of predators, not protectors. Because sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. Sometimes the person they thought they could destroy becomes the person they should have feared most. Remember, you're never too trusting to become strategic. You're never too naive to become sophisticated. And you're never too late to use your expertise to protect yourself and others. Your inner wisdom matters. Trust it. Chen Financial Security Consulting continues to protect families across the country. Maya and I work together every day, training the next generation of financial protection advocates. Mrs. Patterson, now 73, still leads workshops 3 times a week. Harold Kim, now 77, has helped law enforcement agencies in 4 states develop elder financial protection protocols. David remains in federal prison, serving 38 years without parole. Every month, he receives our newsletter. Updates on families we've protected, stories of elderly experts who've caught financial predators, news about legislation we've helped pass. I want him to know exactly what his naive little wife accomplished. The woman he tried to murder became the woman financial criminals across the country fear most. And that legacy will continue long after I'm gone. Because inner wisdom, once awakened, never goes back to sleep.